Good evening, everyone. Wonderful to see all of you joining me on this Sunday evening. Absolute pleasure to be with you here again from 16 Alvona Avenue for hopefully the last time, at least for now, when I get out of my quarantine, please God, on Tuesday. It was interesting, just for those who can appreciate this. So when you've got a bit of a rabbinic mind, and they say you've got to be 14 days in quarantine. So there's a question in the Gemara. Is it what we call me 8 late? Like, what does 14 days mean? Does 14 days mean like the day you land is day one, and then 14 days later, or do we go like when you sit shiva on the morning, as you get up on the seventh day? Since you stay at the little of the seventh day, that's considered the whole seventh day. So we say 14 days the entirety, or as long as I get onto the 14th day. So I imagine if I call the Department of Health and ask them, they're not going to be very appreciative and appreciating my dilemma. So just to be stringent, I'm going to stay put until Tuesday. Then I'm off. All right, we're here to talk about the Seder. Seder is opposed to the Haggadah, and I'll tell you why I say the difference. The Haggadah is actually from the Magid part of the Seder. So once you start B'halach Ma'anya all the way to up until you drink the second glass of wine, that is the Haggadah. But the Seder starts with Kadesh Urchatz and goes all the way until, Apikam and Nirtza, where we start singing Haggadah and everything. So the Seder is a much larger corpus, and I wanted to share some ideas from the Seder, not just from the Haggadah. Even though we most of us talk about the Seder being the night and the Haggadah being the book, the reality is the Haggadah is the Magid part of the Seder. So I've got a few ideas. My goal is to try to share some ideas that are unique, meaning that a lot of the ideas I'd like to share with you tonight, I don't think I'd share on other years. So albeit that the Haggadah itself is a book that doesn't change, I think the way we relate to it and the way we experience the Leila Seder is going to be very different on this year as it would be in other years. In other years, we have the distractions of company, which we don't have this year. Now, for I would say that is almost always for better, that we have our loved ones by our side and we're able to share the experiences with them, whether they be friends or family. But in this particular year, we do not have that. You really are going to have the people that are, that are eat with you Monday to Friday, or let's say Sunday to Thursday. Those are going to be the people at your Seder this year. And for many of you, it means there are going to be two of you at the Seder. And for some of you, are going to be a bit larger. But it's definitely not going to be in having, even your immediate family, your parents, your cousins and the like, who are not going to be there to join it with you. So it is really that Manishtana Shana Azot, in what way is this year different from all other years, is that I would say that for everyone on the call this evening, is that the Seder that we do this year is going to be very different to the Seder we've done in every other year. And for, if nothing else, this is a year where the concept of slavery is probably as close as it's ever been in our lifetime, in as much as our freedom of movement is limited, our freedom of expression is limited, and albeit we're not slaves and we still have enormous amount of abundance in our lives. Nevertheless, the concept of being restricted is something that is unfamiliar territory for us. And so therefore, when we sit around the Seder, you're going to have a couple of different, experiences. So for those who, I think some of the questions I get every year is, I have people coming to my Seder who really don't want to do the Seder. So, and what's the minimal I can do, without, cutting too many corners. So this year, that should not be a question. Because my guess is those people who will not be at your Seder this year, unless you are those people, which I doubt you on the call. But so that whole idea is really going to be now, how do I take, I've got all the time in the world, because instead of coaching for 20, 30, 40 people, I'm coaching for 2, 4, 6, 8 people. I don't think there's anyone here who's going to have 8 people at their Seder, maybe 6 people at their Seder. That's my family. I don't know who else is on the call, but I'm assuming there's going to be many more than 6 at the Seder. And the question is, it's not going to be amount of time, but really, how do we make this book meaningful? And how do we do it in a way that will not use technology? Because technology is fantastic, and I don't know what we would all be doing at this point in time if there wasn't technology to assist us from our isolation. But that being said, it also has the effect of being able to detract from the text and allow us to, screen shows or show movies that try to enhance the Pesach experience, which I think is a little bit contradictory to the ideal goal. So let's go through a number of different things. If you've got a Haggadah in front of you, I'm going to try to go with all the ideas according to the order. I will not speak on the entire Haggadah, but on the entire Seder, but just at least parts of it. Okay, so it starts with a Kadesh. Kadesh is the Kiddush. It is somewhat different to the regular Kiddush that we make on a Yom Tov, only in as much as it becomes the first cup of the 4 cups of wine. Now, practically, that's a halachic difference, because usually on a cup of wine, you just have to take a sip and that's sufficient. But on the Leila Seder, you have to drink the majority of the cup. So it is really the beginning of the experience. And we go Kadesh, Urchatz, Karpas. So Urchatz and Karpas are both there for the same reason, and that is Shatinokot Yishalu, that the children should ask the question. Now, this is something that comes, you will see throughout the Haggadah, a lot of stuff that we do actually serves one purpose alone, and that is to make the evening look different. So, for example, sometimes we pick up the cup, we put down the cup, we cover the matzah, we uncover the matzah. You look in some of the Haggadot, they say we actually remove the whole Seder plate from the table. The Urchatz is we're washing our hands here. We're not making a blessing, which is unusual for, every time we wash, it's always straight for bread, but now we're washing, there's no bracha. Then we're eating karpas. Never any other time during the year do we have a concept of eating a vegetable before the Seder that has absolutely nothing to do. So it's not the maror which we're eating because it's reminding us of the bitter time, but rather it is there because there's no reason. It's that people should ask. In fact, there's a Hasidic minhag that since the karpas just has to be something that takes on the blessing of vegetables, it could potentially be any vegetable. So my guess is if you're from South Africa, use parsley, Hungarians use potatoes, some use carrots, but there's a Hasidic minhag that they would mamish try, they go to town on this. They use strawberries, they use bananas, whatever it goes, any blessing, they would take a blessing of Adamah. And the reason that was done was that people would look and say, we're having strawberries now, like what's up with that? And that was to create the questions. Now, it's all well and good that you say the goal is to ask the questions, but it's like almost like you instigate the question, but there's no answer to the question. There, you never dip parsley in salt water, so why tonight are you dipping parsley in salt water? So, good question, my son. I'm doing that so you will ask that question. He says, okay, I asked it. So now what's the answer? It says, no answer. I just did that so you asked the question. So it's sort of like this, vicious cycle of the fact that, okay, I've asked the question and now you've disappointed the kid by not having an answer to the question. So I think that, and this is going to be very true with the Haggadah, because what the Gemara comes and says, what do you do if you don't have a kid? So it's all well and good. So so all the kids get up on their chairs and they're saying, Manishtana. And my guess is we've all been at times, and maybe some of us still have kids that are of the age that they can get up on the chair and sing Manishtana. But at some point, those kids are going to be old enough that they want to get up on the chair and sing Manishtana. I mean, I was always the youngest kid at the Seder. I mean, up until I was 21, I was the youngest kid at the Seder. So, like, at 21, I wasn't standing on the chair singing Manishtana. I was a public school kid, so I couldn't get past the first verse anyway. But, so Manishtana is Matzah, Chametz Matzah, and that's where the song began, and that's where the song ended. So what do you do now? So you're a couple. So what are you going to do? You're going to sing it to yourselves. Like, how do you do it? So the Gemara intuits this, and it says, and if the Baal Seder, the person, just say you're running a Seder by yourself. So what do you do? So it says, then you ask yourself the questions. Is because the goal of the Seder is not only to engage the children, but the goal of the Seder is to be curious. And the whole concept of curiosity is something that for most of us has become something so foreign within our Jewish existence. So, one of the scary things when I deal with converts with Jewish partners is that the convert will know 10 times more about Judaism than the Jewish partner will. And that's just a consistent, because Jews just take for granted this is what we do, but there's absolutely no curiosity. So when a non-Jew and a Gentile comes and sees, why are you doing this? Why are you doing that? And they look at it with fresh eyes, all of a sudden they get fascinated by it. And they say, why are you doing this? And we say, that's what we do. But the whole concept of curiosity is to be able to look at something different and say, why is it different? We'll come to this a little bit again later. But that is the goal of the Seder, is to arouse curiosity. Now, even though we think that Shavuot is the night of learning Torah all night long, Leila Seder is the night of transmission of tradition. That is the goal of the Leila Seder, is that it's parents with children ideally, but even if it's not with children, it's the idea that I have a Masada, I have a tradition, I have a heritage that goes back 3,500 years, and tonight I want to instill that with you, because you know when this all began? This began in Egypt, when we were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt, and that's how the story, that's how it begins, with trying to set a tone of a curious personality with how we're going to approach the evening. So curiosity is something that is incredible value if you can maintain it throughout one's life. Rabbi Soloveitchik always used to say that, the ability to be childish, to be childlike without being childish. Childlike is the ability to ask the questions, like the emperor's new clothes, where everyone else was too embarrassed or too shy, or too scared to say, well, hold on a second, but he's naked. That's what it means to be childlike, to be able to see something and to say, I don't understand, it doesn't make sense to me. So that is how we're all supposed to be approaching the Seder, regardless of whether we're doing it as a matriarch, patriarch, or we're doing it as an individual for ourselves. Okay, next part of the Seder. And this is the actual beginning of the Magid part. So we uncover the matzah, we've broken it in half, we've done the yachatz, and we lift it up, we say, halach ma'anya. This is the bread. So the word halach ma'anya means the bread of our affliction, or a poor man's bread, that our forefathers ate in the land of Egypt. All who are needy can partake, all who don't have, come in, come join our Passover. Now we're here, next year we'll be in the land of Israel. Now we're slaves, next year we'll be free men. So why does this, now this, interesting, like just from a technical point of view, this part of the Haggadah is in Aramaic, it's not in Hebrew. The rest of the Haggadah is in Hebrew. This part is in Aramaic, because it's the language of the diaspora. It was written during the Babylonian exile. That's when this part of the Haggadah was written, and comes to be part of it's a colloquial invitation. It's a very bizarre invitation. If you say at the night of the Seder, how do we start it off? I remember as a kid, you always used to say, like, anyone wants to come and partake. And like, you'd be sitting and you're looking and you're like, hold on a second, like, who's tucker going to come in the room? Now imagine you were saying that, and all of a sudden someone's like waiting outside the front door and knocks on the door. As you say, all you need to come park, and there's a knock on the door. Says, I just heard your call. I've come to join you for the Seder. So my guess is no one would be particularly excited by that prospect. But why does the Haggadah start with it? So Rabbi Soloveitchik said something quite profound in that, how does one react to the concept of freedom? So the first sign says, when you go from slavery to freedom. So a slave is somebody who does not have time and also has no possessions. Within halacha, whatever the slave owns, the master owns. So how does a slave share? The answer is the slave can't share, because it's not his to share. So the first thing we do is, we are now free people. We are now independent. We now can share that which we have. Albeit it's a morsel, it's a halach ma'anya. It is a very poor man's bread, but the ability to share, the ability to give to others is how we show our freedom. Now, what's quite fascinating, and I was listening to a podcast, it's worth listening to, if you listen to Intelligence Squared, which is an English podcast, not a Jewish podcast, but this particular episode was an interview with Lord Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. And he made the point, which just talked about how you see the best of people and the worst of people in crisis. This is, you see the people who are volunteering, offering to go do shopping for people who can't go out themselves, who are really, really going out of going beyond the letter of the law to help others. And you get other people who are hoarding food and going for this, and it's all about me, myself. I need to make sure that I'm okay. I need to make sure that I'm safe. I need to make sure that I've got enough food, with little concern or care for everybody else. And it's that dichotomy of how one behaves when one has the ability to be free. Are we going to use that freedom as an opportunity to self-indulge and to be able to, how am I going to get out of this? How is my life going to be, affected by this situation, as opposed to how can I contribute to this? We are all in a similar situation, that we are all nervous about what's going to be for us and what's going to be for our families. And so it's bunkering down and looking at like, okay, how can we withstand, the next few months or years as this epidemic takes control? And another way of looking is like, what can I do to make the world better despite everything that's going on here? In Egypt, this is like, we live a very fairy tale narrative of the Egyptian story. So we like to read it as like the Egyptians were the bad guys and the Jews were the good guys. And the Egyptians ill-treated us and then we got out. Now, for those who benefited from the history series they had with Dr. Simon Holloway, there was, so he was talking about the Warsaw Ghetto and the different groups within the ghetto. And understand that within the ghetto, you had, let's say, the bulk of the Jews who were the victims to the Nazis, but you had a lot of collaborators, a lot of people who exploited the opportunities that they had positions of power within the ghetto, whether they were official or unofficial, but exploited it as a way of self-preserving themselves on the back of their Jewish brethren. Now, that wasn't unique to the Shoah. That happened in Egypt. In Egypt, the taskmasters, when it talks about the taskmasters of Egypt, these were Jewish taskmasters. They were not Egyptians beating the Jews. They were Jews beating the Jews. So in every situation, when oppression comes, there are going to be people who say, how am I going to get out of this? Survival of the fittest. The only way I'm going to survive this is by jumping on the backs of my brothers and my sisters. And that's how I'm going to survive it. Or alternatively, you can say that I am part of a community, and the way we as a community is by seeing not how I get out of this, but how I can ensure that we can survive and we can thrive as a community. And what can I give? Not what do I need? This is old JFK. Not ask what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. But much more so, it's like, and every time when we feel, what's in it for me? What about me? Our mind needs to shift and say, what can I contribute? What can I give? How can I do? And it's amazing, like how much is out there of people who are already volunteering. I mean, the Facebook group is phenomenal with the amounts of people that are just volunteering. That can I help? How can I help? I need some eggs. I've got some eggs. It's just incredible to see that. So that is where this whole halach ma'anya comes in. Is that we are here, we're taking our poor man's bread. All we have is poor man's bread. And what's the first thing we do? Say, who wants to join us? I have one piece of matzah. It's not even a piece of matzah. We've just broken it in half. I have half a piece of matzah, but I will share that half a piece of matzah. And that's how we start the Seder. So it's really, it's such a profound idea of being able to look at our disposition as an opportunity to do good rather than an opportunity to self-preserve. I think that it's a lot of things that I'm hearing and a lot of things that I'm thinking. I'm not sure if the stuff I'm thinking is stuff I've already heard, or I've heard it or thought it and then somebody else said it. But, this period of time will be the legacy of our generation. So you have the war generation and you have our generation, and how we come out of this pandemic, how we were as grandparents, parents, children, teenagers, that will determine our legacy. And it can be one that is saying, or could be one who just says, listen, slam the doors, shutter the windows, and let's make sure that we get through this okay. All right. All right, that's I'm going through my notes here. So all right. Okay, so I'm jumping now quite a bit forward to the four sons. Now, I did have a talk last Sunday night on the Book of Freedom, the Book of Hope, which so I'm skipping out a lot of this. If you'd like to see that, it is on my YouTube channel. But so I'm going to the four sons. So I want to focus on the last son. The last son is the V'she'enu de Yishul. Now, so I had a pick and pay Haggadah that I grew up with, and it said, he who hath not the capacity to inquire for himself, which I never understood what it meant, but the one who can't ask questions. So what does it mean he doesn't know how to ask questions? Enu yodea lisho. He doesn't know how to ask. So there's an interesting article written by Rabbi Norman Lamb. He was the head of Yeshiva University. It says there are three kinds of people who don't know how to ask. It says one is you got the lazy, the slumberer. the person who, life passes him by. It's not that he lacks the intellectual capability of asking questions. He just lacks the ability to attention. It's like we said at the beginning, he lacks the curiosity that things happen and they go by and they miss the point. So, and this was something I was definitely thinking this. I said it to Tamar before I heard it from Rabbi Sachs, but he said it as well. It's like, is this experience that we are about to go through going to change us? So the way he quoted an English historian, he says, if history's taught us anything, is that we've never learned from history, which is a sad reality, because it's not the first plague that we've been through, and we've been through wars, and we've been through lots of challenges, and nevertheless, it doesn't seem like as a community, we've community not being the Jewish community, but as a whole, that society has been able to look at the world and change significantly as a result. So that is the slumber. That is Shadu Elisha. The individual who looks at the corona and sees that we are in isolation and says, all right, my job is to make sure I get through this. And then as soon as we can get back to the golf courses and the gyms and the shops and the work, it's back to business as usual. And if this whole experience we go through and we are not changed as a result, so that's the Ein Udei Elisha. Is incapable of saying, like, why would Hashem make this happen? Like there must be something we can learn from. So if you haven't read the book, it is without a doubt one of the most profound books I've ever read. It's called Man's Search for Meaning, the late Viktor Frankl. So he was a very deeply religious, although not observant, which is a term I struggle with a little bit, but very God-conscious, although not observant. And he was a psychiatrist who went through Auschwitz. And the book is divided in two parts. The first part of the book talks about, he really psychoanalyzes both the inmates and the wardens of Auschwitz. And in the second part of the book, he talks about his psychotherapeutic modality, which he calls logotherapy. And logotherapy is a form of therapy which is that if you can find meaning in suffering, then the suffering is not meaningless. Meaning that if something happens to you, so you break your arm, and you think about it for a while, and he says, I broke my arm. You know what? Maybe I need to give more charity, and maybe that's the reason God allowed me to break my arm, because I need to use my arm more in giving charity. Now, whether it's true or not is irrelevant. But if you can become a great charity giver as a result, so the breaking of the arm had a positive effect. It's not, again, don't confuse. It's not saying that that's why God broke your arm. It's saying, what can I improve on as a result of my arm having broken? So what can this experience of corona, what can this experience of fragility, anxiety, what can it do for me to allow me to emerge from the experience a better person? And if that happens, then even though it might not justify the experience we went through, nevertheless, it makes the fact that the experience had value in that I'm a better person that comes out. So that's the first way of the Ein Udei Elisha. The person who doesn't know is the person who just goes through life and they see things happen, but they don't pay attention enough to ask the question. The second kind of person who doesn't ask questions is the person who's embarrassed to ask questions. If I ask questions, it's a sign of weakness. Now, the Mishnah in Perek Avot says, that a person who's embarrassed will never learn. I remember at university, my first year, so I came straight after high school, and the level of maths required at university was much higher than what I had at school. And so I got in there, I didn't understand a word of what was going on. And I looked around, and everyone else seemed to know what was going on. So I didn't ask any questions, because everyone, and then I worked my tuchus off over the year, and by the end of the year, looked at the grades, and all my mates failed. And so it's like no one knew what was going on. The difference is that everyone was too embarrassed to ask the question, lest they look like they're the ones who don't understand. So that's the second kind of Ein Udei Elisha, individual who doesn't know. And then you get the third individual who is so out of sync with Judaism that they're not even around to ask the question. This is what the Lubavitcher Rebbe said was the fifth son. So the fifth son is the son that doesn't even come to the Seder. But you do get that son often does come to the Seder, but he's the one, looking at his watch, waiting for the Seder to be over. So you've got to find a way of inspiring them. Now, most of the commentaries acknowledge the fact that there are no four sons. There never have been four sons and never will be four sons. There are four kinds of personalities that are rooted in each and every one of us. We each have an aspect that's a chacham, that's a rasha. We've got parts of us that is very inquiring and very, very, very curious, wants to know. And there are other parts of us that are very cynical, like the wicked son. And some of us, sometimes you are very simple in our questioning of literally being able to see something, ask it, and some of the stuff just goes over our head. We don't even know how to ask. And it's trying to be that she'ena delishal, that aspect within our personality to ensure that we do not allow this moment to go by and not change us at all. All right. So I'm going to skip over now. We're going to go to the plagues. And guess which plague I'm going to talk about? And it's not pestilence, but it's close. Okay. So I'm going to share my screen now. 2 seconds. All right. So we're talking about the plague of darkness. I assume everyone can see it on the screen now, the sheets? Yep. All right. So this is the plague of darkness. Moshe lifted his arm to the sky, and thick darkness descended upon all of the land of Egypt for 3 days. People could not see one another, and for 3 days no one could get up from where he was, but all the Israelites enjoyed light in their dwelling. So when we think of darkness, I think most of us think of the absence of light. But the Medrash is very clear that that is not what it was. So it says as follows. So this is what the Medrash says. Where did the darkness come from? Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Nehemiah, Rabbi Yehuda Omer Mechoshesh Ma'ala. So he says it was the darkness from up high. As it says, he makes darkness, quotes a verse from Tehillim, he makes darkness his screen, dark thunderheads, dense clouds of the sky with his pavilion around him. Meaning that up in the heavens, there was darkness. So the darkness came from Shemaim, came from the high. Rabbi Nehemiah said the darkness of it was the darkness of Gehenna. The Gehenna, we don't have hell in Judaism, but the closest thing to hell is Gehenna. But it means that it doesn't come from the presence of God, but it comes from the absence of God. As it said, a land whose light is darkness, or gloom and disarray, whose light is like darkness. So the way that Rabbi Lam comes to explain this, and it says that what was the plague of darkness? It says it was isolation. It was the idea that for 3 days or 6 days, according to Rashi, the entire Egyptian nation had no opportunity to engage with one another. And there was absolute darkness that kept people paralyzed. And that is what the horror of the darkness was. So he says, when you are alone, what is the nature of isolation? So there's a difference. Soloveitchik talks about the difference between being alone and being lonely. So it says to be alone just means there's nobody else around. That's to be alone. Be lonely, you can have tons of people around you and still be lonely. Okay? So when people don't appreciate what you are going through, so a good example would be a mourner. So a person who's sitting Shiva might not be alone. There might be a ton of people in the house, but they're incredibly lonely because no one is experiencing that with them. So it says the darkness is the difference between do you feel alone and lonely or just lonely. So it says it depends on where the darkness comes from. It says the darkness, and this was an interesting way, it says the Bnei Yisrael also had darkness. It says, but it was a different kind of darkness. It was the darkness from Shemai. The Egyptians had the darkness from hell. Meaning as follows, that when you are alone by yourself, you realize that you're there with Hashem. Is that a period of time that is exciting, that is, an unbelievable opportunity for introspection, for reflection, for meditation, for religious experience? or is it a hell that you're waiting to get out of? As a kid, much better now, probably because I'm completely zonked, but when I was a kid, I could never go to bed without the radio on. I used to listen to 702 every night. I used to put on the radio, John Robbie, and it would be going, and used to had to have the radio on next to me before I went to bed, because I couldn't be alone with my thoughts. I don't know why. As a 15, 16-year-old, I just couldn't be alone with my thoughts. The idea of lying in bed at night alone with my thoughts petrified me. And for many people, that is it. The idea of isolation is fear, because I don't want to be with myself. I don't like myself. And the idea that Hashem's with me petrifies me. And that's exactly what it was for the Egyptians. It was the darkness from Gehenna. But for Bnei Israel, it was an unbelievable opportunity. The isolation wasn't terrible. That the idea that the way that the Medrash understands that the Bnei Israel had light in their homes, wasn't that there was black versus white, light versus dark in a physical sense. But both experienced the darkness in a very different way. One experienced it as an unbelievable opportunity for spiritual elation and connection, and the other saw it as an opportunity, as a terrible liability of fragility and loneliness and existential despair. And that's the difference between the darkness. And so we have a similar experience here, is that isolation, it is what it is. The question is can it become something phenomenal? Can this whole, there will be times, I think, that when we come, and this is something I'm trying desperately hard myself, that when I look back on this period of time, there are certain elements of it that I'll miss. The quiet. There was a certain quiet, like over Shabbat. It's unbelievable. Like to be 25 hours in my home and just with the Tamar, myself, and the 4 kids, and there was no distractions whatsoever. And we're going to miss that, because there will be guests, and there will be a shul, and there will be kiddushes, and that 25 hours will be condensed to what, 3, 4, 5 hours, maybe 6 hours. And the whole experience, we're going to miss it. And the opportunities that we have now, that to read, to learn, to grow, that we never had before, I think we will miss those opportunities for growth. Okay. That's the plague of darkness. How are we doing time-wise? No, still doing good. All right. I haven't been able to work much on this, but it's something that's resonated in my head. Is I think I've seen a number of memes of the great irony that we're not going to be able to leave our houses on Pesach because of a plague that is coming over the world. Is, if you've got a little bit soft for a second here, one of the things that many within the Jewish world believe, and it's regardless of one's level of religiosity, and that is that somehow Torah and mitzvot will act as a defense shield against tragedy. So this is something that, again, from the person who comes to shul once a year on Yom Kippur, who comes to me and says, Rabbi, I try to be a good Jew, and yet bad things happen, and literally the only mitzvah they have is fasting on Yom Kippur, to the ultra frum who are doing everything by the book, and they choose to say, well, we are protected from the divine decree because we keep Torah and mitzvahs. And the reality is that Torah and mitzvahs do not act as a shield against the tragedies of the world. Okay, so Bnei Israel, so we're in Egypt, you've got to put blood on the doorpost. So people mistake it. Why was the blood on the doorpost? So you ask most people, they say, the blood on the doorpost, so God could see, when the angel came, he would see that this is a Jewish house and jump over it. Yeah? So it's not that. It's that the blood was on the doors for us to see, not for God to see. That we should see the blood and acknowledge, and we should not venture out. So if a Jew went outside his front door in Egypt, what would happen? So if he was a firstborn, he would have died like all the Egyptian firstborns. We were not protected in any unique way other than by the blood of we're staying indoors, you put the blood on the doorpost, that will be our protection. But if you go out into the streets, you are going to risk as much as everybody else. I don't care how long your payers are. I don't think how big your stromal is. I don't care how kosher you keep. I don't care how much tzedakah you give. The way the Ramban brings it, when there is an angel of death, so to speak, going out through the streets of Egypt. So, it doesn't matter if you're a righteous, pious individual or wicked individual, it does not distinguish. And we are in a time like that. Is that, if you think that, this is a terrible time, I'm going to give more tzedakah. Yes, you should give more tzedakah. But giving the tzedakah is not going to make the difference. And you should do more mitzvot. And you should daven harder. But don't think that by you doing it, this quid pro quo, Hashem is going to say, well, because Krebs said an extra chapter of Tehillim, his family will be healthy. It doesn't work like that. You got to wash your hands. You got to stay indoors. You got to not congregate. You got to keep social distancing, and you don't go around strangers. It's like as simple as that. You just keep the rules, and yet we see it all over that people just, people just not listening. It's unbelievable. There was a front page article in Melbourne of secret minyanim that are happening. And it's happening everywhere. This idea that somehow, if we are frum, God will save us. No. There was a shir that someone posted the other day that got my goodies, to, as they say. It was 10 segulot. I didn't listen to the shir, so it could be that the shir was a bit misleading. So that the title was misleading. It says 10 segulot. Have a recovery from corona. Probably whatever the case might be. So I wrote on the group, I said, the greatest segula to being healed from corona is listening to whatever the doctors tell you. So if the doctors say, don't leave your house, then that's probably the best chance you have of not getting corona. And they tell you to wash your hands, and if they tell you to, that's how you do it. I'm not sure if everyone agreed with me on that particular one, but that's fine. All right. All right, Dayenu. So next part I want to just talk a little bit about is Dayenu. Dayenu. So one of the things about Dayenu is you got to stop it after each verse, because if he took us out of Egypt but didn't do judgment, so if he took us out of Egypt but he didn't judge them, which meant he took us out of Egypt, but the Egyptians got off scot-free. They weren't punished. Nothing bad happened to the Egyptians. Dayenu. Okay, Dayenu. What does that mean? Great. Happy. Good. This is fantastic. Okay. All right, he judged them, but he didn't make their gods to nothing. So it says, okay, I would have loved that as well. But you know what? Dayenu, I'm happy. Is that each step of the way is to be able to say to someone that, this is I'm happy with this. I don't need any more. And and then by the end it says, look, God didn't have to do any of this. But look how much more we have to be appreciative for. So it's not a matter of just looking at the glass half empty or half full. It's a matter of look at the blessing that we have. I mean, I've been speaking to my friends in Johannesburg, and I don't know why it's spun me so much. But I'm scared for everyone over there. How does a person in Alexander, how does he quarantine himself? I mean, he's got no running water. He's got 6 people in a shanty bedroom, and he's from hand to mouth. And how's this guy go? And I'm kvetching that I've been 2 weeks in quarantine. I'm in Gan Eden over here. I've got a nice big house. I've got my kids around. I've got enough food to sink the Titanic. I've got what exactly am I kvetching about? There are people out, and for me to, it's I feel like we are complaining about our seat allocation on the Titanic. I mean, it's like the world is in peril, and I'm kvetching. This is I didn't ask to sit in 15A. I asked for 15. I wanted a window seat. It's unbelievable. So Dayenu is really not to show how, it's supposed to be minimalist, not maximalist. We've got all these, but look what we should be happy. As a wealthy individual is one who's happy with what they have, and doesn't need more. Okay. Pesach matzah umaror. I've spoken a lot about that in previous years. I think what I'll just point I'll make, not so much on the Rabban Gamliel, but let's just go to the korech. So korech that we have, that's the Hillel sandwich. So the Hillel sandwich is taking the Pesach, it would have been the Pesach, but at least now it's the matzah and the maror. So we put all three. So the Pesach is supposed to be symbolic of freedom. The matzah is the bread of freedom that we ate because we didn't have time for it to rise. The maror is because the Egyptians embittered us. And the Pesach is the process of going from the maror to the matzah, right? That's the Passover, and that's the matzah. So it's this whole process, we have them together. So why do we have them together? So Rav Kook talks about the fact that the reason we have them together is understand without maror, there's no matzah. Okay? You can only have matzah once you've experienced maror. Once you've gone through the bitterness of Egypt, can you appreciate the bread of freedom? So, one of the questions comes, what will happen the day that we can go back to shul? And this is something that I don't know if I'm excited for it or nervous for it. Because on the one hand, I'm excited because I think people will crave connection. But I'm nervous that they won't. And that they're like, we'll just, as I said, we'll just go back to where it was. I never went to shul on Friday night, so why will I go back to shul on Friday nights now? I never went to, and this idea that once you go through isolation, the whole goal is that once you can now reconnect, the connection is different. You appreciate the matzah because you had the maror. Only through isolation can you appreciate what it means to be community. I mean, we're trying here. It's very interesting as a rabbi. I mean, imagine all of us in all our different areas of life are trying to find unique ways to do what we used to do, but now having to do it differently. So one of the things that's quite fascinating is that, so you've seen this. I hope you've seen the schedule of Rabbanim that we've got on. So do you know that I think it would be impossible to get all the rabbis of Sydney to agree to do anything at any point in time in the history of the world, and yet we've got us all giving a shiurim, and because it's online, you've got people from different communities and even different cities that are just coming and being part of it. It's unbelievable. How does that happen? Is because, see my Melbourne connection there, putting his hand up. So, this idea that we can do things differently. But now once we get out of isolation, all right, back to your corners, let's start boxing again. Where we say, wow, this is unbelievable. We can connect in a way that we don't ever connect before. And so the same with the matzah. Once you have the maror is the stepping stone to the matzah. The isolation is the stepping stone towards a reconnection. And hopefully all those relationships will be reconnected in a way that they hadn't been prior. All right. I'll end with my last idea is on Hallel. So Hallel is unique. The only time that we ever say Hallel at night is on the Leil Seder. It's called Hallel Hagadol. It's the big Hallel. And it's actually because we say Hallelujah and the Tzeti Som Mitzrayim, and then we eat the meal, and then we say the rest of Hallel afterwards. Now, Hallel is praise. Now, the question of the Haggadah, or the whole Leil Seder, is the goal of the Leil Seder. So, ask it slightly differently. When we daven, what is the goal? So, there are usually three different aspects to davening. One is praise, and praise is acknowledging who God is and what God does and how God runs the world. And that's the first three blessings of the Amidah. Then there is request. Please can you do A, B, C, and D? And that's the next 13 blessings of the Amidah. And finally is Hoda'ah, thanksgiving. The last three blessings of the Amidah, which is to thank Hashem for blessing. So the Haggadah, where does the Haggadah fall in? Is the Haggadah, yes, it's remembering Egypt, but okay, is it just we went out of Egypt, have I fulfilled the mitzvah? Or is it, you need more than that? So is it something that it is a night of thanksgiving? And you'd say, well, surely that's what Dayenu is. Dayenu surely is a thing of thanksgiving. We're making lots of blessings, 4 cups of wine. So that seems to be, and we're consistently talking about that God took us out of Egypt. So that sounds like very thanksgiving. Or is it praise? Because we say hello, which is definitely part of praise more than it's part of thanksgiving. But if you look at the blessing on the second cup of wine, this is just before we start the meal, and it says as follows: Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam. Blessed are you, Hashem. Asher ga'anu v'galed avotenu Mitzrayim. That you redeemed us, and you redeemed our forefathers from the land of Egypt. So that is thanking. No question, that's thanking. But it doesn't end. And you brought us to this night to eat matzah and maror. So at that point in time, that blessing seems to be one of thanksgiving. But then it changes. So too Hashem and God of our forefathers, please let us come to more festivals and celebrations in the future. That we should see the rebuilding and the joyous rebuilding of your city, and we should be able to serve again in the temple, and we should be able to eat from the sacrifices, etc. there. It moves away from thank you for that which happened in the past to please Hashem, let it be better. How do we end the Seder? The same way as we end Yom Kippur. Ashana haba b'Yerushalayim habnuya. Next year in a rebuilt Jerusalem. So it's on the one hand, we are looking backwards and we're saying, thank you, Hashem, but we have something more to ask, that you give us a final redemption. And so I think like if I'm just trying to like summarize all the ideas that I've tried to give tonight, is that this year the Seder takes on a completely different significance than it has in other years. Where in other years we were desperately trying, we're struggling to appreciate what slavery meant to life, because we as free people are trying to remember what slavery we felt like. This year we sit much more like slaves trying to remember what freedom is. And so we go back to what the original Seder was. And we should be told what Seders have been for the vast majority of Jewish history, of sitting and hoping for a better year, hoping that next year, I'm scared to think, come, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur this year, when we start in the Seder Natane Tokef, and we start singing Rosh Hashanah Yikatevu Yom Tzom Kippur Yichatemu, that's going to be inscribed and sealed, Mi B'tzom U'mi B'magaifa, who will die by famine and pest and plague. I mean, we said it to Rosh Hashanah last year. Who would have thought that, 6 months ago, we'd be sitting here in isolation? It's unbelievable. And so we need a shift of mind. Our Seder this year cannot be like our Seders of every other year. So, Manishtana Hashana Zot Mikol Hashanim. So this year has to be different from all other years. Wish you all, I'm thinking, Gemar Chatima Tova, Pesach Kasher v'Sameach. If you have any questions, I'm happy to unmute. Or if you want to put up your hands, you can unmute yourself or put up your hands. Yeah, Jared.
So I have a question with regard to, you sort of said during the plague of darkness that it was a time for the for Jews to be more introspective. But I'm just trying to sort of marry that up with the fact that they had, that wherever they went, there was light. So how did they get the opportunity to be, introspective if the darkness didn't surround them? Albeit I know a lot of Jewish people, I can't remember the exact number, but a lot of people died in the plague of darkness. But in terms of introspection, I'm just trying to sort of marry that up.
Okay, so a couple of things. Number one is that the plague of darkness had two parts. It had the first 3 days that were, according to Rashi, that was just darkness. The next 3 days was paralyzed darkness, so to speak. And that's when the Jews had light. Was the second 3 days was the first 3 days. I'm happy I'll send you, for the benefit of everyone, I'll answer you, but I'll send you the article. Just, I know you've got, just WhatsApp me or email. I'll send you the article so you can read it inside. But the idea being over there is that the light, again, darkness and light throughout rabbinic literature has taken on a much deeper understanding than physical darkness and physical light. And usually those two things sort of work in parallel. There's a pshat, a simple understanding, and a drush, or like a sod, a much deeper understanding. So, for example, on the first day of creation, there was God created light, and distinguished between light and darkness. So, whatever the light and darkness was on the first day of creation, it wasn't what we call light and dark, because the sun was only created on the fourth day. So Rashi over there talks about the fact that the light over there refers to goodness, and darkness would be the opposite. So over here, what the Medrash is doing is taking this concept of light and darkness in Egypt and distinguishing it between the physical light, the physical darkness, but there was a different element. There was a spiritual concept of this emotional paralysis that is darkness, which the Egyptians suffered, but the Jews didn't. Okay? The article will explain a little bit better than me, but that's in essence.
Got it. No, that's great. Thank you.
No problem. Dave, you unmuted yourself. You have a question?
No, I thought you had finished. You're about to finish.
I don't know. Okay. Anyone like to?
Just wanted to thank you. It's a great Trosha. Great.
No problem. Anybody else?
Just before I go, Rabbi, I think it's amazing that you've been able to orchestrate all the Sydney Rabbanim to get together as one big Kehillat, just to try and offer this and give the opportunity for people to connect. So kol hakavod to you. I wish I'm trying to get people at the Rabbanim here in Melbourne to move towards that direction.
Let's see how long this goes. It's only so long that people will be able to handle the Sydney Rabbanim. You might need to go a bit more international. I have international ambitions, I assure you. All right.
Awesome. Great stuff. Thank you.
No problem. Okay. Anybody else? Questions? Comments? Going. Gone. All right. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a wonderful evening. You should all stay safe, stay healthy, and look forward to seeing you next time. A few more other shiurim coming up. I will be giving a shiur next Sunday, which will actually start going through practical. How do you do a Seder for those of you who've never actually run a Seder before? We'll do that next week. We're also going to be a big change. There's going to be a Q&A with Rabbi Gutnick on Tuesday evening for all your Pesach questions on kashrut. So you don't have to ask me, you can ask him. He will be at this exact same address. Wish you all a pleasant evening.
Thanks, Rabbi. Good night. Lala to everyone.